Good evening, everyone. Susanna, next slide, please. So what I'd like to do this evening is really to talk to you about the Surpass system itself. So Surpass is the system that we use. It's the assessment platform, and that's how we present the questions to you in the test centres when you're taking the registration assessment. It's really important that you properly familiarise yourself with how the Surpass test system works, including all of the functionality, and know in advance how to easily navigate around the questions and use some of the functions that are available. That way, you'll not waste time in your actual assessment. So what I'd like to discuss is how you access Surpass once you get into the test centres and some of the initial screens that you'll need to travel through. And then I'll focus largely on the questions themselves, how to navigate through the questions, and I'll talk to you about some of the functions that are available in Surpass. Finally, we'll just focus on how to actually finish your test. And again, we'll talk about some of the screens that you'll travel through on your way out of the assessment. It is really important that you take time before your assessment to look at the example questions that are on our website. These serve two purposes. Firstly, the example sets give you a flavour for the sort of topics that we'll be testing in the registration assessment. They also give you an idea of the depth of knowledge and understanding that you'll need. Secondly, the sets will allow you to become familiar with the Surpass functionality. And whilst I can describe that to you this evening and I can show you some screenshots, actually this is a really poor substitute for you actually going onto our website and clicking into the example questions yourself. So I really would recommend that you do that. There's functionality there that some of you will choose to use and some of you won't. Some of you, for example, will want to use highlighter functions. Some of you will want to use on-screen calculators. Others won't, but you don't want to be working that out when you're sitting in your assessment and therefore wasting your time. Next slide, please, Susanna. So first of all, then, accessing the system itself. And this is a two-stage process, and that's really to maximise security. So first stage is that once you're sitting comfortably in your test centre, you'll be provided with an 8-digit key code. You'll enter the key code and you'll click OK. That will take you then to another screen where you have the opportunity to just check your personal details. Next screen, please. Check your details. Most likely they'll be correct. If you've got any worries or concerns at that point, raise your hand and speak to an invigilator. Otherwise, click the confirm button to move to the next screen. Next slide, please. Now this screen you need to read carefully. Once you've moved past this, you've agreed to abide by the assessment regulations and you've also confirmed to us that you're fit to sit. So take your time, read the points on your screen and then accept the terms and conditions and click to move forward. Next slide, please. Once you've clicked, you won't come straight to this instruction screen. When you're in the test centre, you'll actually come to a locked screen. That will be locked until you're provided with a PIN number by the invigilation team. At this point, you've said you're fit to sit, but your time hasn't started. So sit back, relax, and wait until everyone's ready to start. Then enter your PIN code and you'll be taken to an instruction screen. When you're in the instruction screen, there's quite a lot to read. Take your time. Your assessment time hasn't yet started until you've clicked to start the test on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's some useful information there. It's customised part 1 and part 2. So you'll read about part 1, 40 questions. You've got 2 hours unless you've got additional time. It's not negative marking. And some of the questions will have resources that you can open as many times as you wish. Once you get to part 2, you've got 120 questions. The first 90 each have 5 options and the last 30 have 8 options. If you need to return to the instruction screen at any point during your assessment, there's a little icon at the bottom of the screen and you can click back into that and then back to whatever question you're at. So take your time to read the instructions and then start your test. Next slide, please. So the next few slides in my presentation are screenshots from our example questions. As I've already said, the best thing for you to do is to go into those examples yourself and learn how to use the functionality. But let's go through some of the functions together. So at the top of your screen, you'll have the total test time remaining. This is customized for each individual candidate. So if you're someone who's been granted additional time through the adjustments process, your additional time will be also showing on the top of your screen. In your actual assessment, as well as the total time remaining, you'll also have a progress bar, and that will show you how many answers you've already answered. So in part one, once you've answered 20 questions, your progress bar will both state and say 50%. So that's another way to help you with your time management in the assessment. Down the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a trail of breadcrumbs. There's one for each question. You may move freely between the questions, either using the breadcrumbs and clicking on the questions, or by using the back and the next buttons at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. To answer a part one question, you need to click in the answer box and then type in your answer. You can enter numbers, a decimal point, or commas, but you won't be able to answer letters. In terms of a calculator, you can use the calculator that you've brought with you, and those are laid out clearly for you in your on-the-day instructions, or you can choose to use the on-screen calculator just by clicking on the basic calculator icon. If you're planning to use the on-screen calculator, then I would strongly recommend that you practice doing that beforehand. This particular screenshot is question 5, and you can tell you're on question 5 by looking at the breadcrumb trail on the left-hand side, and you'll see that the number 5 breadcrumb is a slightly different shape. In your assessment, if you want to scroll quickly down the breadcrumbs, there will be an arrow at the bottom of the breadcrumb trail, and if you click on that and hold your mouse down, then you can move very quickly down the breadcrumb trail. You don't have to click 1, 2, 3, 4. You can quickly move down the trail. And that can be very helpful, particularly if you know, I just want to go back, for example, to question 43. So that's a quick way to move around the system. If when you're doing your questions, you come to one that you think, I definitely want to go back and check that one, you can flag that question. So down at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, beside the back button, you'll see a little flag icon. If you click on that, whatever question you happen to be on will be flagged on the breadcrumb trail, and I'll show you that in a moment. This question 5, I've used this deliberately because I really want to highlight to you the importance of reading questions properly and really carefully in the assessment, particularly in relation to rounding, because in every assessment, rounding seems to trip our candidates up. Remember, it's not just a math test. This is a pharmacy calculations test. So you're expected to bring your practical knowledge with you to the assessment. This example question was used in the 2018 assessments, and 89% of the candidates back then got the correct answer. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the same question, and if you just have a look at the breadcrumb trail, you can see that question 5 has now been flagged. That makes it really easy once you get to the end to think, that's the one I wasn't sure of, I can go back and check my answer. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is the grid that's at the bottom left-hand side. So bottom left-hand side of your screen, firstly, you'll see a sort of a cogwheel. If you click on the cogwheel, that will allow you, thank you, Susanna, that will allow you to change the colour of your screen in the assessment. So there are various options available. You can have a pink screen, you can have a yellow screen, you can have a black screen with white writing. If you think that's going to be helpful for you when it comes to reading questions, explore the functionality in advance so that you can quickly select what you want. You can click it on and off. You don't have to make a choice and then stick with that through your whole testing time. Next to that, you've got the grid, which I'll come back to in a second, and then you have a question mark. If you were to click that question mark, that would take you back to the instruction sheet. But back to the grid. So the grid functionality is really helpful. Once you click on the grid, that shows you an overview of which questions you've attempted, which you've yet to answer, and which you've flagged. So for the purposes of this webinar, I have answered the even numbered questions. So I've answered 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And I'll show you how that is demonstrated on the next slide. Next slide, please, Susanna. Okay, so once I click on that grid, bottom left-hand side, I get this section review panel that opens. And you'll see there that question 5 is still flagged because I've not gone back and checked that yet. You'll also see that I've put an answer in for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. The breadcrumbs have changed colour and they've now turned down. You'll see that I'm on number 12 because the breadcrumbs are different colour. And you'll see that the odd numbers haven't changed at all. So I know I've not put anything in the answers there, and I need to go back to those and put in some answers. So the question that we're on now is question 12, and that's a question that we used in the November 2021 assessment, a little bit more difficult than question 5, and 71% of our candidates got that right. And just to let you know a little bit about the example questions, they're written by the same pharmacists who write questions for the registration assessment. We've got a really excellent team of around 50 pharmacists right across the UK who help us with question writing. When we put a new question into an assessment paper, it's normally been reviewed by between 15 and 20 pharmacists by that time. So we can be really confident in the accuracy of the questions and also in the validity and the relevance to practice. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to very quickly summarise what we've done so far, we've got our breadcrumbs down the left-hand side. We can use that to move around. We can also use the back and the next buttons to do the same job. If we want to put an answer in, we click in the answer box and then we type. If we want to change the screen colour, use the cogwheel. If you want to get an overview of where you are, click on the grid. And if you want to specifically highlight a question to come back to, click on the flag when you're on that particular question. The on-screen calculator can be opened at any point in part 1, but obviously not in part 2. And I'll come back to the finish test button in a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, that brings us on to part 2 and the example set that we have for part 2. So it's multiple choice. So this time you're not clicking on a box and putting your answer in, you just click on your answer. So you can click on the bar itself, or you can click in the example questions where it says A, B, C, D, or E. In the real exam, you won't have A, B, C, D, and E down the side. You'll just have a circle, and you can either click on the circle or just click on the option itself. Either's fine, and you'll see that it changes colour. So it's very easy to see what answer you've chosen. Again, you've got the familiar trail of breadcrumbs on the left-hand side, but with part 2, there's this additional functionality on the left-hand side, this sectioning. You can see it in the example questions. We've got 2 sections. In your real assessment, there'll be 3 sections. So sections 1 and 2 will each have 45 questions, so a total of 90, and that's your best of 5 questions. And then section 3 will have 30 extended matching questions, each with 8 options. When you're moving down your questions in the assessment, presumably you'll start at section 1 and you'll go down 1 to 45. When you click the next button on 45, you'll just automatically go into section 2, question 1. You can move around freely around the sections and around the questions, but if you don't do any particular manipulation, you'll just trot through from 1 to 120. But you can move around as you wish. Next slide, please. Okay, so a feature that some candidates find very helpful is the online highlighting tool. If you want to highlight some specific information just to help you with your reading and your understanding of the question stem, if you just click and move the mouse along the information, on this slide I've clicked on the 0.8 milligram per litre, then the icon, the highlighter icon then appears. If you click on that, then you can highlight and it will appear like the 2.5 milligram per litre 1 hour text in the line above. So click on the text that you want to highlight, scroll across with your mouse, the highlighter icon will appear, click on that and the text will be highlighted. You can also do that in resources, and I'll come on to talk about resources in a moment. And again, that can be helpful for some candidates. This is another question that we used in a recent assessment back in 2016, and 69% of our candidates got the right answer. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the basic functionality, but I just want to touch then on questions that have PDF resources attached. So some questions in part 1 and in part 2 will have additional information added onto the question. When you read the question, there'll be a really clear icon, which I'll show you in a moment, which will say View Resource. You simply click into View Resource. What will happen in your assessment is that the PDF will open up and it will dock side by side alongside the question. Some of you will find when you're looking at the example questions, and in fact, this is how it is for me, it docks on top of the example. But in the actual registration assessment, you'll have side-by-side docking. That means that you can read the question and you can search for the answer really easily. You don't need to manipulate the documents on your screen. In terms of functionality for the PDF resources, if we just have a look there at the panel that's popped up, you can use the toggle sidebar to gain an overview of the document. If you want to scroll down the document, you can use your mouse as normal, or you can use the hand tool. But probably the most important thing is how to search the PDF resources, and it's not a Control F function. So Control F does not work in Surpass. What you need to do is just click in the magnifying glass, and then a little box will pop up exactly as would happen with Control F, and you type in the word that you're searching for. So please do keep that in mind. We did have candidates in June who contacted us after the assessment and said, but the Control F didn't work. The Control F doesn't work. You need to use the magnifying glass, and that works in exactly the same way. You can also zoom in and out if you wish to magnify the content using the plus and the minus, or the automatic zoom. If you were to click on the little downward arrow, you've got various options, set to screen, 100%, 150%, etc. And as I've already said, you can highlight bits of text in the PDF. When you're going through your questions in your assessment, you can open the resources, close them down again as many times as you want. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one really is just to show you what that review resource icon's like. So it's very obvious to you when you're doing the questions if there is additional information. It will always say something like the supply alert is provided, an extract from an SMPC has been provided below, and then the icon. So you'll be able to see that very easily. This is another question that we used actually last November, so November 2021, and 90% of our candidates got the right answer. And that just brings me on to a little tip, and that's not to be afraid of questions with resources. We do know that some candidates perhaps leave them to the end and feel a bit worried about them. Just treat them as you would treat a question in practice. Often the answer will be in the resource, so take the time and have a look at it. If it's an SMPC or an extract from an SMPC, in practice, I wouldn't read an SMPC. I wouldn't have time, and I wouldn't need to. I would go to the section of the document where I know the answer will be. The same in the registration assessment. Don't be panicked by opening a resource and thinking, 5 questions, I've not got time to read that. We don't expect you to read that. Make sure in advance that you're really familiar with common sources of information that are used in practice, and then you'll be able to access the information that you need quickly and easily. And usually the information will be there in the resource. So please don't panic about resource questions. Once you get to the end of your test, then you'll be clicking the Finish Test button, probably sighing a sigh of relief. So you can see that highlighted up on the top right-hand side of your screen. If by any chance you've run out of time and your time has just gone, you will still, your answers will be treated in the same way, even though you don't formally go through the steps that I'm going to just mention now. So if you're working and you don't realise that your time's about to run out, you've forgotten about the reminders, don't worry, your answers have been saved. But most of you will be clicking on the Finish Test button. Because this is a high-stakes assessment and we don't want anyone to leave the assessment until they're ready, because once you've hit that Finish Test, you can't go back. You'll be asked to confirm twice that you actually do want to finish the test and you've not just hit the wrong button. Next slide, please. Once you've gone through that process of finishing, you'll come to a finish screen and you'll get a sort of a range of messages. So it'll confirm that you've completed whatever part of the assessment that you're doing. It will confirm that your answers have been saved for marking. Please don't worry that your answers haven't been saved. If something happens to the internet in the test centre, which it shouldn't do, your answers will still be saved within Surpass. The functionality holds on to everything until we can extract it the following day. So please don't worry about that. You must leave all of your rough working pages behind at your workstation when you leave. Again, that's for test security reasons. Follow any instructions from your invigilators. And remember to continue to abide by the assessment regulations, and in particular, in relation to the sharing of assessment content, whether that's by email, text message, Telegram group, WhatsApp. The list is not exhaustive. You'll also have instructions on how you will be receiving your results. Next slide, please. So just really by way of summary, hopefully this has been helpful for you, but it is a poor substitute for you getting onto our website yourself, having a look at the example questions and also the guide that's on there to the example questions, because that will signpost you to several links within Surpass, which will again explain some of the functionality. So please do take a look at those example questions. And as I said at the start, they do serve 2 functions. It gives you an understanding of the sorts of topics tested and the depth of knowledge needed. And hopefully I've explained to you and given you some information on how candidates have performed on those questions in the past. But really importantly, it gives you a chance to familiarise yourself with the on-screen functionality. So thank you all for listening.